Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning, everybody. I'm Jason Wheeler in for Jason Whiteley this week as we bring you a special edition of Inside Texas Politics from the Capitol in Austin, where the big news has been happening this weekend. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has been acquitted. The Senate did not meet the two-thirds vote threshold to convict him on 16 articles of impeachment. They dismissed 4 other articles of impeachment. Now, the votes on the political charges faced by the Republican AG were largely along party lines, with a couple of notable exceptions. 2 Republicans, Senator Robert Nichols of Cherokee County in East Texas and Kelly Hancock, the senator from Tarrant County, sided with Democrats in voting that 14 of the 16 articles had been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Also, some Democrats sided with Republicans on 2 of the 16 articles. Those were Articles 4 and 8. Now, with Article 4 being the most lopsided vote of the day, though, with 28 nays and just 2 yays. Now, just after those votes were taken there in the Senate chamber, the senator jurors, we'll call them, started making their way out. And Teresa Woodard, you were there, running through the Capitol, really trying to chase down these senators and get their reactions. Some of them very happy to talk and share their thoughts, and some of that was very emotional.
Mostly it was Democrats who were willing to talk with us and share their thoughts. We're going to begin by taking you inside deliberations. The Democrats called them respectful, congenial, but said that they were fluid and said that not everybody went into the room knowing exactly what they were going to do, but many did. I talked with Royce West and Nathan Johnson. Both of them are Dallas Democrats. Here's what they say they heard and saw.
I mean, people talked about the different issues. Some people had already made up their mind from the very beginning, I can tell you that now. And there was discussions concerning outside influences.
What do you mean by outside influences?
Political influences. I mean, there were a lot of Twitters and things like that, frankly, talking about, I guess you could say, primary contests and things of that nature.
So there's a number of people in the middle. And at some point, whether because they determined that they were going to acquit or because they felt compelled to acquit in order to remain in office, for which I have some sympathy, it was clear that there were not going to be enough votes to convict. And then the dam breaks.
Now, what Johnson meant about the dam breaking is that Republicans, he believes, were not willing to go out on a limb if large numbers of their party weren't going to go out on a limb with them. Now, one Republican, Bob Hall of Edgewood, he walked out of the Senate after taking that vote and walked straight in front of the cameras, and he harshly criticized fellow Republicans, those in the House, who brought this case.
There was no evidence. This has nothing to do with whether he's done something wrong or not. It has a definition of what's an impeachment and what the guilty is. I voted for dismissal on all of this because the procedure was not followed. We should have never had the trial.
Okay, so let's talk ramifications. Does Senator Hall think that there should be consequences for the Republicans in the House who brought this case? You know what he said, Jason? That's what elections are for.
Interesting. Good job, by the way, tracking those 3 down.
I'm glad I had on my tennis shoes running through the hallways of the Capitol.
Most of them were able to duck out. I'm interested to see, though, they have 72 hours to enter their written comments about those deliberations into the record, so we may see some more insight into what happened behind closed doors. But, Teresa, thank you so much. Good work. Let's talk about this a little bit more now with our Reporters Roundtable. We actually have 3 of those this time around because there's so much to discuss. As always, with us, Ian Mitra, the senior managing editor from the Texas Tribune, as well as Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas. Let's start off with the verdict, of course, because that's why we're all here. Paxton is the 3rd person to be impeached in Texas history. Only the first, though, to not have been convicted and removed after being impeached. And Bud, let's start with you. These were not by small margins. These were overwhelming margins.
Well, I think it was a small margin throughout the trial and going into the day. I never thought that he would be removed. I thought the whole trial that there would be 10 votes to keep him. And I think there were 10 or 11, and then some other Republicans who really hadn't been on his side all along jumped in along at the end. I think that what happened here was a typical Senate vote. I think that this was just like any other day in the Senate, March, April, May. You vote along party lines and vote with Lieutenant Governor Patrick.
Ian, Bernadine, either one of you have thoughts about how overwhelming this was? I think a lot of people here in the Capitol were expecting this possibly to be much closer on many of these articles.
Well, you know what? Initially, from the beginning, we talked about it being a political trial. And it ended up that you did have some Democrats who did vote with Republicans, but by a large margin, it was all mostly Republicans, and they were just not willing, for whatever reason they give, they were just not willing to get rid of their attorney general. They were not willing to remove an elected official by impeachment. And I know that Hall said it was the process. Well, you know, if you're looking at the evidence, then what does that have to do with the process? But anyway, it largely went down party, and it was a political vote.
Ian, I want to ask you, you know, as Bernadine just pointed out there, this was a political trial here. Many people, of course, expected politics to at least be some kind of a consideration for these senator jurors as they were deciding on these different articles. Do you get the sense from what you've seen and how the votes came out here that anyone goes forward out of the Senate beyond today and is vulnerable because they voted one way or the other on these different articles?
Right, and we're talking about a trial that happened in 2023, but this political process is a lot about 2024 and beyond too. And so we're also coming off a session where senators kind of drew lots for whether they were drawing 2-year terms or 4-year terms. And so let's not forget that there's some senators who are up for election a little bit sooner than others. And certainly this has been a political process with with the party and with other outside forces making a lot of hay about kind of the votes here too. So certainly as senators were doing this, they're also thinking about their political futures and thinking about a very potentially challenging primary right around the corner.
Jason, I'll jump in.
One of those Republicans, I was just going to ask you, Bud, one of those Republicans is right there in your backyard, Tarrant County, Senator Hancock. He's one of those Republicans who kept joining Democrats here. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Senate districts are bigger than the House districts. It's very hard to defeat an incumbent senator. They have these gigantic districts. They cover a lot of territory. Kelly's covers a lot of North Fort Worth, mainstream Republicans, as well as North Tarrant County. And North Tarrant County was split. Some of the conservatives, like Connie Burton, weren't too excited about bringing back Ken Paxton either. So I think Senator Hancock is safe. I was going to say that this trial changed from May when the impeachment was passed. By this time now, Donald Trump has made it into, he's made the Ken Paxton trial into a mini Donald Trump trial. All the Trump backers made it into like a symbolic Trump trial. Impeachment is in fashion these days. Trials are in fashion, and the whole nation latched on to Ken Paxton as a frightening example of what can happen when elected officials are put on trial.
Bernadine, the lieutenant governor was the judge in this trial. He came out after and slammed the impeachment process and said that they're going to have to go back in the next legislature and change how this is done.
Well, yes, I know, and he blamed a lot of it on the House and House Republicans, but keep in mind, they followed the same process that he claims he was following, and they saw the evidence differently. Apparently, the majority of the Republicans in the House saw that the evidence was credible. They sent it over to the Senate to try it and determine if he should be removed or what. But they saw the evidence differently. So if he wants to change it, fine, and good luck on that, because they have a number of other issues that they're going to be, that will be challenging to the Republicans as well as the Democrats. But how are you're blasting one house for doing what they thought that they were doing correctly, and then he's saying that he had an open and fair trial. So what's the difference other than, if you look at the past, the House and the Senate are not necessarily the best of friends anyway. So I think that he just took that
Yeah,
opportunity.
we're going to talk about that for sure. Yeah, we're going to talk about that for sure. Also, good luck on changing those rules, because you're going to have to get a lot of votes to do that, including in the House. All of you, please stay put, because we're doing a lot of roundtables today because there's a lot to talk about here. Coming up next after this break, does this make Attorney General Ken Paxton the most powerful Republican in this state? Our second roundtable coming up right after this.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Ken Paxton is the most corrupt politician in the state of Texas at this time. And the Republicans in the Texas Senate just returned him to the office of top cop.
House managers who worked with the prosecution in the Ken Paxton impeachment trial reacting after the verdicts came down, a total acquittal for the Attorney General. This gets us to roundtable number 2. Ian, Bernadine, Bud, all still with us here. Let's talk about the man at the center of all of this. That's Ken Paxton, of course. Is he now the most powerful politician in Texas after being acquitted here? Ian, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. He certainly seems to be, seems to be making an argument for that. But I still think, looking at Dan Patrick and the power that he wields in this state, and the power that he has in the Senate too. He obviously continues to be a very strong Republican leader. Although Ken Paxton certainly has shown that he's got a lot of fight here.
Of course, we know he's back on the job already, reinstated immediately at the conclusion of this impeachment trial by the lieutenant governor there. We know, though, Bud, that Ken Paxton still has criminal exposure and an investigation into him. Those haven't gone away yet. He still has vulnerabilities there, perhaps, but does it help him to be, still the guy who has the name on the door there at the Attorney General's office, which happens to be right here in the shadows of the Capitol?
Well, he's the flavor of the month for talk shows across the country, I'm sure. But, as far as power, I think the power belongs to Lieutenant Governor Patrick, as he showed all along, playing judge with his thumb on the scale. You had 3 phantoms in this trial who were never allowed to testify. Nate Paul, Laura Olson, Ken Paxton. We never heard from any of them, 2 of them because Dan Patrick didn't want them to testify. He runs the Senate with an iron fist. He told the senators to get on board and get voting fast, and they knew what he meant. There's no question who's the most powerful Republican right now. As far as popularity, Greg Abbott and John Cornyn still lead. Remember last year when Ken Paxton ran for re-election, in the primary, 57% of Republicans wanted somebody else. He does have a little more name ID now.
Yeah, I think that
Bernadine, those court cases aren't going away.
They're not going away, and so they will always be at the front of what he's doing. Now, I think that he will hold his job until there's another election, because you are not going to see anybody else trying to impeach or get rid of Paxton. But I think that it's still, it raises a concern as to whether or not he is as powerful. Now, he's going to stay in that office, but you still have, and then keep in mind, I keep going back to Senator Hill. He didn't say that Paxton was innocent of these charges. What he did, he attacked the process. So, and then you still have Abbott, who didn't come out and say anything until after he was acquitted. And keep something else in mind. He won the primary in a runoff. As Bud said, you had over 50% who didn't want him. But I will say that he's going to be the darling on the conservative talk shows. They're going to have him everywhere to show that you don't try to get rid of one of our elected officials.
Yeah, and I do say that he has that securities case still pending here, but of course that's been pending for many years, but it looks like there has been some momentum on that there in Harris County where it will be tried. Ian, I'm curious, do you think that we're going to see sort of a season of revenge ahead now that the Attorney General has been restored to his office? It's a powerful office, and he's a powerful fundraiser and campaigner.
Well, certainly, Attorney General Paxton has really prided himself on his fight against the federal government with the lawsuits that he's filed and things like that. And certainly he will continue that and increase that. I mean, I think what's going to be interesting too is seeing the fight within the party itself. Not just the House versus the Senate, just within the Republican Party themselves.
Yeah.
Tony Busby said, talked about in his, in his closing remarks about the era of the Bush, the Bush era is kind of over in the Republican Party, and so it's just there's really going to be a continuing battle within the party that we'll see continue in the next year.
Yeah, I think that segues perfectly. We've got two chambers at odds with each other on both ends of this Capitol right now, both of them controlled by Republicans. There is a chasm in the party, and we're going to talk next after this break about the fight for the soul of the Republican Party here in Texas. It's gotten ugly already. We'll see you on the other side.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Hi again, everybody. Jason Wheeler back with you. I'm in for Jason Whiteley this week, and as you can see, we are coming to you from the Texas Capitol in Austin, where, of course, the big news has happened here this weekend. The Attorney General of the state of Texas, Ken Paxton, has been acquitted on the impeachment charges that he was facing, but of course the fallout from all of this has only begun. The Republican Lieutenant Governor who leads the Senate and oversaw this trial as the judge slammed the House of Representatives, saying that they basically rammed through the whole impeachment process and that our founding fathers would have expected better. In response to that, the Republican Speaker of the House fired right back across the Capitol in a statement saying that those comments by the Lieutenant Governor made it clear that the trial outcome was biased and orchestrated right from the start. And again, we're not talking about Democrats and Republicans going at it here. This is red on red, and it has gotten ugly. Back with us again is Ian and Bud and Bernadine. Let's talk about what is happening here, because this has implications that go far beyond this trial, Bud, because we know that these two chambers are still going to have to work together, not just in future legislative sessions, but in a special session that is expected to come along pretty soon. And this one has to do with education, which is a big priority for Governor Abbott. Are these two going to be able to get anything done?
Well, Jason, this trial was part of the bitterness between the two chambers. The Senate felt like this was a hot potato that the House sent over and dropped in their laps the last couple of weeks of the session to keep them busy and to punish them because they hadn't passed a lot of House bills. They resented having to do it. You could tell in Dan Patrick's comments afterward how much he resented it and hated even having to conduct a trial. Then they just kind of agreed that whatever Ken Paxton did, just let the FBI and the courts handle it. This kind of bitterness between the House and the Senate is not new in Texas, but this is a real low point.
Ian, I want to ask you about that, because the whole reason that we would get to this special session on education is because they couldn't come to an agreement in the regular session earlier this year. The conditions between the two chambers, even though they're both Republican-led and dominated, was pretty chilly at that time. That was early on in the year before we got to this whole impeachment process and all of the back and forth that has come out of that. Does this imperil what has been a really big priority for Governor Abbott?
Yeah, well, let's be grateful that that this special session isn't starting on Monday, because I don't think anyone's in a mood to really kind of talk with each other right now. But I think when it does start, I think the governor, who, as you mentioned, has really kind of earmarked this aspect of school choice and vouchers as a priority. Also, the aspect of teacher pay and teacher raises that also didn't get addressed earlier this year in the regular session is a big component of this too. So, there's going to have to be some kind of some getting over of some of the tension right now, which is hard to see. But ultimately, this is a key priority that Greg Abbott has really staked a lot of his political focus on, and so there's going to be a lot of debate, but also certainly there's going to be a clear prioritization here, because this is such a priority for the governor.
So Bernadine, does the governor, ask the chef at the governor's mansion to whip up the best lunch possible and try to get Speaker of the House Dade Phelan and maybe Lieutenant Governor Patrick to kind of get in there and make nice?
Well, you know what, he's going to have to do that. But I think that he's going to have to wait and watch his timing. Because what do they say about getting in the middle of a fight? And presently, you have the House and the Senate are definitely fighting each other. If you watch and listen to what happened following this acquittal, the verdict, but he's going to have to. But I don't think at this point you're going to see anybody who wants to give, because as the House said, they blame the Senate and say that the Senate was purely political, whereas the Senate is saying, but you sent us over here. They criticized the process. They blamed them for giving it to them. It was clear they did not want to remove a Republican who has basically fought for their issues and their conservative issues. So if he doesn't, but I think that he needs to, it is very political. So, and I think he understands that, so he should move very cautiously. But if he wants his priorities to pass, he's going to have to get them to play nice, or he's going to have to become a broker. And he's going to do a better job, have to do a better job of it than he did in the other sessions.
We're already hearing a lot about those primaries coming up as well. We'll see how many members of the Senate or the House of Representatives are vulnerable because of all of this. Bud, Ian, Bernadine, thanks so much for talking it all through with us. A lot to get to this week for sure. By the way, we spoke with Matt Rinaldi, who is the chair of the Texas GOP, about this infighting, and he didn't mince any words about this. You can catch it wherever you get your podcasts. Just look for Yolitics. It is an interesting episode to be sure, one of several we dropped just this week. That is it for us on this momentous week. Thanks for being with us.